High security prisons can be scary places for many different reasons. Australia's are no different, with a host of criminals capable of the most despicable acts locked behind bars. However, one name is enough to send shivers down the spines of the most seasoned prison officers and other high security inmates like no other. We're talking about a man they call the General in these circles. His real name, Matthew Johnson. His life story reads like a guide to being a hardened, violent criminal. He's known for showing a strict loyalty to a brutal prison code, countless violent crimes throughout his career, and one particular act that gained him nationwide and international renown, the cold-blooded murder of Melbourne's gangland kingpin, Carl Williams. But who is the man behind the headlines, and what led him down this dark path? This is the life and crimes of Matthew Johnson. The signs were there for all to see from a young age. Born on August 9th, 1973, in Dandenong, Melbourne, Johnson grew up in a troubled household, which set the wheels in motion for his life of crime. His father passed when he was just 6. This early tragedy must have turned Johnson's world upside down. His mother did remarry, but the man she chose could not have been a worse influence on little Matthew. His stepfather, Wayne Johnson, was described in court as an aggressive alcoholic who subjected Matthew to abuse. His mother was able to get them out of that situation, and again she remarried, but this time the man ran away with his own niece, leaving Matthew and his mother alone once again. His life in education was no less of a roller coaster. He only made it through year 7 before he was expelled and was sent to St Kilda Community High School, an institution for at-risk youths. However, his formal education came to an end in year 10, and he came out of school and into the world of crime. At only 15 years of age, Johnson had his first run-in with the law. He started committing minor offences, but that quickly escalated to more serious crimes. Before long, he was stealing cars, breaking into homes, and in possession of illegal weapons. He also became a slave to substance abuse issues, taking amphetamines, marijuana, and other prescription drugs. It was his first visit to a real prison at age 17, when he entered Pentridge Prison, that the true extent of Matthew's troubled life came to the fore. Rather than deterring him from reoffending, Johnson enjoyed the strict structure that the prison system provided him, something that had been missing from his life. Prison culture was where he felt at home, and this was the moment that cemented his future as a perpetually wanted criminal rather than a reformed one. When he got out, Johnson's criminal activities only escalated, and much more rapidly than before. He soon graduated from petty theft and moved on to more violent and organised crimes. He became deeply involved in brutal run-through home invasions. These violent attacks began to plague Melbourne's southeastern suburbs. They targeted drug dealers in areas like Keysborough, Doveton and Springvale, and the sheer level of extreme violence and total disregard for human life shown in these violent break-ins was eye-catching. By 1994, at the age of 21, Johnson's notoriety had grown, and he was already known as a dangerous man to local law authorities. He was sentenced for causing serious injury and affray, and it begins to become clear just how far down the rabbit hole Johnson had gone since those early days in his teens. He began to yo-yo in and out of prison repeatedly, but each time he spent a period behind bars, it only seemed to spur him onto more and more serious crimes when he was released again. In 1999, at 26, he was convicted of armed robbery, showing that he had moved on from breaking into other criminals' homes and started using weapons and intimidation to steal from anyone he liked. This conviction led to a 6-year sentence with a 4-year non-parole period, which only added to his status as somewhat of a criminal celebrity. This time, his time in prison became as violent as his life outside. He gained a reputation for extreme violence, choosing in particular to attack protected inmates. While in Barwon Prison's Acacia unit in May 1999, Johnson viciously attacked Gregory Brazel, a convicted murderer, adding an additional 20 months to his sentence. Matthew was becoming a figure feared by other inmates and very much known as a problem prisoner to prison authorities and law enforcement agencies across Australia. In the early 2000s, Johnson once again found himself a free man. However, his rap sheet seemed to continue to grow, encompassing a wider and wider range of offences. This time it was theft, burglary, gun possession and other various acts of dishonesty. Each arrest and subsequent court appearance only seemed to enhance his notoriety, and in 2007 he set out on a crime spree that was enough to shock even hardened enforcement officers. He and a still unidentified accomplice started by targeting a mother and daughter outside a McDonald's restaurant. Johnson dragged the mother from her car at gunpoint, while his associate punched the teenage daughter in the face and then stole their vehicle. Later that same night, they stormed a home, robbing a couple at gunpoint under the mistaken belief they were drug dealers, a throwback from his 90s drug house raids. Johnson was eventually found in the days following these incidents in a railway station parking lot, sitting in a stolen car. He was promptly arrested and seemed certain to be back behind bars in no time at all. By now, he had amassed an astonishing 167 prior convictions in his criminal career. It's hard to find a better example of the failure of a justice system to curb the behaviour of a criminal. Johnson's court appearances were events in their own right. Journalists began flocking to report on his trials, noting how dangerous this man appeared to be. One reporter described him as having the unpredictable aura of a man who had spent too long immersed in violence. Johnson had already made a name for himself, both in the world of the criminal underground and also to an extent in the public eye. However, as he entered his 30s, he would go on to become one of Australia's most notorious criminals of all time. Johnson was sentenced to 13 years imprisonment following his 2007 crime spree. Judge Jeff Chettle, presiding over the case, didn't mince words, describing him as a real menace to society and that prospects for his rehabilitation were nil. Despite the lengthy sentence, Johnson's notoriety continued to grow behind bars. His time in prison was marked by violent incidents and a growing influence over other inmates. In 2009, while still serving his sentence, Johnson faced his most serious legal challenge yet, a murder trial for the death of 18-year-old Brian Conyers. The prosecution alleged that Johnson had shot Conyers dead over a drug debt of just $50. In the testimony from Johnson's housemate, Timothy Prentice, it was stated the incident occurred when Johnson gave Conyers $50 to purchase cannabis. When Conyers failed to return with neither the drugs nor the money, a confrontation followed outside Johnson's home in Berwick. The court heard that when Conyers arrived without the money or cannabis, Johnson allegedly shot him in the chest with a 9mm Luger. That same weapon was later found on Johnson during a routine search at Glen Iris Station when it fell out of his pants. There were even allegations that Johnson had gone on to mutilate the victim's body. The prosecution painted a very grim picture of Johnson as a cold-blooded killer. However, in a strange twist of fate, after deliberating for an exhausting 27 hours, the jury ultimately found Johnson not guilty, even with the mountain of evidence presented by the prosecution. Going through a trial and surviving such a sentence would provide experience Johnson would need to call upon several more times in the future. The acquittal, coming after such lengthy deliberations, raised eyebrows, both within the legal community and the general public, but Johnson had won. Throughout this period, while serving his lengthy sentence, Johnson's influence within the prison system continued to grow. He became known for his adherence to a strict criminal code and his willingness to enforce it violently if anyone else stepped out of line. This led to his most infamous act, one of the most notorious moments in the history of the Australian prison system. Carl Williams was once one of Australia's most well-known gangsters. He was himself serving a 35-year prison sentence on multiple murder charges. On April 19th, 2010, he became Matthew Johnson's highest-profile murder victim. The attack, captured clearly on the prison's CCTV cameras, was one of frightening precision. Williams was sitting in the prison's recreation room, concentrating on the newspaper in front of him, featuring a front-page story about himself. Silently, Johnson approached from behind, armed with the metal stem of an exercise bike seat. In a swift and brutal move, Johnson struck Williams on the side of the head with the improvised weapon. The force of the blow sent Williams crashing to the floor, but Johnson wasn't done, and continued to beat Williams with the metal pole without any hesitation. The attack was merciless and methodical. Johnson clearly wanted to make sure he ended Williams' life. After the assault, Johnson dragged Williams' body back to his cell in a final act of disrespect. The entire incident, from the initial strike to the disposal of the body, was entirely planned and executed perfectly by Johnson, showing just how cold and calculated he had become. During his trial, Johnson attempted to justify his actions by claiming self-defense. He alleged that Williams had been planning to kill him using billiard balls in a sock. However, this claim was swiftly dismissed by Justice Lex Lasry as fanciful. It was possible that Johnson getting away with one potential murder in 2009 may have made Lex dismiss any sort of self-defense plea. As the case went through court, the underlying tensions and unwritten rules of prison life came to the fore. It became clear that Johnson felt Williams wasn't falling into line with his idea of how prison life should be, so he attacked and killed him, believing it right to do so. Justice Lasry criticised Johnson's adherence to a meaningless underworld prison code, suggesting that Johnson believed he had a special entitlement to kill when he deemed it appropriate. On December 8, 2011, Johnson was sentenced to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 32 years for the murder of Carl Williams. In his sentencing remarks, Justice Lasry described the killing as an appalling murder and placed it near the top of any notional range of offending. He noted Johnson's apparent lack of remorse and his misguided belief in his right to take a life based on prison hierarchy or personal ego. Strangely, this murder brought Melbourne's gangland era to a bloody and violent end. Whilst nobody would justify Johnson's actions, he has probably contributed to a more peaceful time on Melbourne's streets in the time since. Since this gruesome incident, Matthew Johnson has gained a formidable reputation, earning the moniker The General and leading the prison gang Prisoners of War within Barwon Prison. However, Johnson has found an unexpected creative outlet in poetry, using it to reflect on his incarceration and experiences. His verses, often raw and unfiltered, provide a glimpse into the mind of one of Australia's most notorious inmates. Controversies continue to follow Johnson. In 2017, he was investigated for allegedly issuing death threats to Carl Williams' ex-wife, Roberta Williams, in an attempt to bolster his self-defense claim. In 2021, Johnson launched an appeal against his conviction based on findings from the Royal Commission into the management of police informants. However, he abandoned this effort in 2022, claiming he had difficulties in obtaining necessary documents from Victoria Police. The murder of Carl Williams catapulted Matthew Johnson into the national spotlight, cementing his status as Melbourne's most notorious prison hitman. This act of violence, carried out in one of Australia's highest security prison units, shocked the public and law enforcement alike. Johnson's actions had far-reaching consequences within Melbourne's criminal underworld. While the murder exacerbated existing tensions among gangland figures, it also solidified Johnson's reputation as a feared and respected figure within prison circles. Matthew Johnson's story is a perfect insight into Australia's criminal underbelly and how the prison system can have the opposite effect on its inmates to the one intended, leading one man down a spiralling path into ever-increasing levels of criminal activity, leading to one of the world's most notorious prison murders. This brings us to the end of this case. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you want more stories from the Australian underworld, please consider subscribing and liking this video. It really helps me out and helps the channel grow. Till next time, take care.